My name is Lester Hargrove, and for months I thought I was losing my mind until I caught my own son-in-law stealing from me under my roof. What shocked me most wasn't just the missing money, but the contempt he carried for me, as if I were nothing more than a helpless old man to be used and discarded. I realized then that this wasn't only about dollars, it was about dignity. What he never expected was that I'd spent 40 years as an engineer, a man who knows how to solve problems with precision. By the end, the thief in my home would face a lesson he would never forget. But before we begin this story, let me ask you, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Family Betrayal Unmasked to hear more powerful stories like this one. The day I discovered the first $1,000 missing, my heart didn't pound with panic. It sank with dread. I sat on the edge of my bed, counting the bills again, my father's worn leather wallet in my hand. 20, 40, 60. The numbers blurred, but the truth remained: $1,000 gone without a trace. For a moment, I wondered if grief had finally scrambled my memory. My wife had only been gone a year, and people whispered about how loneliness made old men forgetful. Was I now one of those men the thought cut deeper than the missing cash? But when I asked my daughter Helen, her face clouded with concern, and when my son-in-law Cleo stepped into the room, the air shifted. "What are you implying, Mr. Hargrove?" he snapped before I'd even accused him. His shoulders squared, his voice rose sharp, defensive. A man who had nothing to hide wouldn't lash out like that. Yet Helen rushed to defend him, saying maybe I'd forgotten. Forgotten, no. I'd lived alone for 3 years after Martha passed, and I knew every corner of this house, every creak in the floor, every dollar in that wallet. This wasn't confusion. This was theft. Still, I forced myself to swallow the accusation. Picking a fight without proof would only drive Helen away and give Cleo more power. That night, I watched from behind my newspaper as Cleo fidgeted by the window, restless, checking his phone every few minutes. Then came the surprise. He pulled a velvet box from his pocket and handed it to Helen with a grin too wide to be real. Inside lay a gold chain, delicate but expensive, catching the light of our living room lamp. Helen gasped, tears in her eyes, hugging him with gratitude. I forced myself to smile. "They must pay overtime pretty well these days," I said casually, watching his face tighten. He claimed he'd been working double shifts at the warehouse, even rattling off details about hazard pay and chemical shipments. I had worked in Detroit's factories long enough to know overtime wages didn't buy 18-karat gold chains. The price matched too perfectly the money that had gone missing from my wallet. I wanted to scream the truth right there, to tell Helen her husband was buying her gifts with my stolen money. But I bit my tongue. A man doesn't win battles by shouting across a dinner table. He wins by planning carefully, by choosing the right moment to strike. Cleo thought he had fooled me, that I was an old fool too weak to fight back. But inside me, something long dormant stirred. Not grief, not confusion, resolve. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the engineer in me was waking again. Problems had solutions, even problems that wore the face of family. My son-in-law had stolen from me, humiliated me under my own roof. But he didn't yet know that every lie leaves a trail, and every thief eventually steps into his own trap. The morning after that golden chain appeared around Helen's neck, I woke with a weight in my chest heavier than any tool I'd lifted in 43 years on the factory floor. I went straight to my nightstand before the sun had fully broken through the curtains. My wallet lay where it always did, but the bills inside were wrong. Too few. The crisp edges I'd counted the night before had vanished. $500 this time. Cleanly gone. My hand trembled not from age, but from fury. For a long moment I sat still, listening to the house. The faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen, Helen humming to herself. The sound of home. But downstairs also slept a man who had stolen from me not once but twice with the confidence of someone convinced I was blind to it. He had underestimated me. That realization steadied my hands. I wasn't losing my memory. I was being robbed in my own house, and worse, in front of my daughter who trusted me. At breakfast, I mentioned it lightly. Strange thing, I said, buttering my toast. Money seems to slip away faster these days. Helen gave me a soft smile, the kind you give a child who's repeating himself. Cleo, on the other hand, froze for a fraction of a second before burying himself in his coffee cup. He didn't even try to hide the flicker of guilt. To Helen, it looked like nothing. To me, it was the crack in the wall. That evening, I pretended to read the sports section while Helen folded laundry on the couch. Cleo paced like a caged animal, checking his phone, adjusting the blinds, running his hand through his hair. He could not stay still. Guilt makes men restless. And when he finally stopped pacing, he turned to Helen with a bright grin that was just a little too polished. "Close your eyes, honey. I have a surprise." From his jacket pocket, he pulled another box. Another piece of jewelry this time, a bracelet, delicate but substantial. Helen gasped, tears welling up as she fastened it to her wrist. "How do you afford these things?" she asked, wonder in her voice. His story flowed easily, too easily. Overtime shifts, hazard pay, double weekends. A man providing for his wife, or so he claimed. Helen believed every word, but I knew better. The math told the truth. The bracelet's value mirrored the missing money almost to the dollar. Each theft transformed into a gift, each lie wrapped in gold and handed to my daughter, as if stolen honor could shine like treasure. I sat quietly, smiling, faintly, pretending to admire. But inside, I made a promise to myself I would not let him buy my daughter's loyalty with my stolen money. That night, as I closed the bedroom door, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The game had started. Cleo thought I was senile, easy prey, but I had built engines and solved failures that could shut down entire assembly lines. I had fixed problems bigger than one arrogant thief, and I was about to remind him that I was still capable of solving problems with precision. Doubt is a poison, and for a short time I let it seep into my mind. Was I imagining this? Was grief twisting my memory, making me accuse the wrong man? I sat at the kitchen table one morning, the newspaper untouched, staring at my wallet as though it might reveal its secrets if I looked hard enough. Helen glanced over at me with worry in her eyes. "Dad, maybe you're just forgetting things," she said gently. "It happens." Her words cut sharper than Cleo's anger ever had. Forgetting things, losing my grip on reality. I wanted to believe her because it would mean the man she loved wasn't a thief. But the truth kept nagging me. I hadn't lost my mind. I'd lived alone for 3 years after Martha died, handling my bills, my house, my life. If I could remember which wrench fit which bolt on a machine from 1965, I could certainly remember how much money I had in my own wallet. Then Cleo walked into the kitchen, hair slicked back, dressed in yesterday's work clothes, but with that smug tilt in his voice. "Money problems again, Mr. Hargrove." His tone wasn't curiosity, it was mockery. I kept my expression calm. "You haven't been in my room, have you?" The words hung between us like a blade. His face changed instantly, defensive anger flashing as he squared his shoulders. "What are you implying? I work 16-hour days to keep this family afloat. I don't need to steal." Too quick, too sharp. A man with nothing to hide would have laughed it off, shrugged, maybe even looked me in the eye. But Cleo's eyes darted away, his voice rising too high, too practiced. I studied him silently, letting him think he had the last word. Inside, I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't just theft. This was disrespect. He thought he was untouchable, that I was too old, too weak, too broken to defend myself. That evening, I watched the way he strutted around the living room, pretending to be the provider, buying my daughter's devotion with stolen gifts. He adjusted the blinds, paced the carpet, checked his phone as if waiting for applause that never came. And all the while, Helen smiled at him with trust in her eyes. Trust I had once given him, too. Lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something men like Cleo only get bolder when they think no one is watching. If I accused him without proof, Helen would side with her husband. Love blinds people to truth, but evidence, clear, undeniable evidence, would tear that blindfold away. I turned off the lamp with steady hands. The decision was made. No more doubting myself. No more quiet suffering. If Cleo wanted to treat me like a helpless old man, then I would let him walk right into a trap designed by a man who spent his life solving problems others thought impossible. He thought he was clever, but he was about to learn he had underestimated the wrong man. The next morning, I rose before dawn, the house still wrapped in silence. I opened my wallet once again, not out of habit this time, but to test a theory. The bills were exactly where I left them. No confusion, no miscount. Which meant the missing money wasn't random, it was patterned, deliberate. A man who steals once may be desperate, but a man who steals again is building a system. Cleo's system was simple: take from me at night, buy Helen's affection in the day, then bury it all beneath stories of overtime and sacrifice. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in the kitchen, watching the steam curl upward. In that quiet, I replayed the way Cleo's eyes darted when I asked about my money, the way his voice cracked under pressure. He thought anger was a shield, but I'd spent a lifetime on factory floors, where lies cracked faster than steel under stress. Anger doesn't hide guilt, it reveals it. When Helen came down, she kissed my cheek, humming like she always did, before heading to the supermarket. Her warmth hurt almost as much as Cleo's betrayal. She still believed she lived in a home built on honesty. She didn't know the foundation was rotting under her feet. If I moved too quickly, I'd crush her faith in both of us. But if I stayed silent, she'd keep living in a lie, blind to the contempt of the man who claimed to love her. That evening, dinner unfolded with the usual routine: Helen's laughter, Cleo's restless energy, my silence behind the newspaper. But my eyes followed Cleo when he thought no one was watching. He couldn't sit still. He checked the blinds, adjusted his shirt, tapped his foot against the floor. Thieves live in constant motion because they fear stillness might reveal the truth. Finally, he broke the tension with forced cheer. "Honey, I got you something." Another velvet box. Another glittering gift purchased with my stolen dignity. This time it was earrings, modest but costly. Helen clapped her hands to her mouth, eyes shining with gratitude. "Cleo, they're beautiful." I lowered my paper slowly, forcing my voice to stay even. "They pay a man pretty well for weekend shifts these days." Cleo's jaw twitched. He muttered something about double time and hazard pay, but his words sounded thinner than the chain around Helen's neck. Helen believed him, of course. Love does that. But I didn't need her belief yet. I needed proof. That night in bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. Cleo thought he had me cornered, thought I was too old to fight back. But what he didn't know was that engineers don't guess. We measure, we test, we prove. Every problem has a solution if you take it apart carefully enough. I decided right then I would gather evidence. No accusations, no shouting, just cold, hard proof. Cleo wanted to play a game in the dark. Fine. But the game was about to change, and this time the rules would be mine. By the end of that week, my patience had worn into steel resolve. I sat in my recliner one evening, the old leather creaking beneath me, and thought back to my years on the factory floor. Machines broke down in 100 different ways, but there was always a cause, something loose, something overlooked, something hidden. Cleo was no different. He wasn't just a man making mistakes. He was a malfunction I intended to diagnose and fix. He believed his act was flawless, the hard-working provider, the loving husband, the loyal son-in-law. He strutted around my house with his chest puffed out, buying my daughter's devotion with gold chains and trinkets. But underneath, I saw what he really was, a parasite feeding on my trust. He thought my silence was weakness. In truth, it was calculation. One night after Helen went to bed, I lingered at the kitchen table, wallet in my hands. I slid out a stack of bills and laid them on the wood grain, spreading them evenly. They looked like nothing more than paper, but to me they were bait. I imagined Cleo creeping through the hallway, eyes locked on my nightstand fingers, itching for another easy take. The thought of him stealing while I slept made bile rise in my throat. No more. I made a decision then that felt like flipping a switch in my mind. Tomorrow I would drive into Detroit and find the tools I needed. Not wrenches or torque gauges like in my younger days, but technology, silent eyes that could not lie. If Cleo wanted to treat me like a helpless old man, I'd show him just how dangerous a helpless old man could be when he decided to fight back. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened to the sounds of the house. Helen's steady breathing through the thin wall. The faint creak of floorboards as Cleo moved around, maybe pretending to check locks or get a drink of water. I closed my eyes, feigning sleep, but every sound etched itself into my memory like a blueprint. His pattern was predictable, and predictability is the enemy of a thief. When morning light broke, I stood at the window watching Cleo's truck back down the driveway. Helen waved to him with a smile, oblivious to the storm gathering beneath her roof. As his taillights disappeared, I whispered to myself, "Game on." I wasn't out for revenge alone. I wanted truth. I wanted proof strong enough to break the illusion Helen was living under, proof that no amount of lies could erase. For weeks I had been painted as a forgetful old man, but very soon Cleo would discover that I had been watching, planning, and setting the stage for his fall. He thought he was stealing from a man too weak to notice. He was about to find out he had been stealing from an engineer who spent a lifetime solving problems, one who had just turned him into the next project. The drive downtown that morning felt different than any other errand I had run in years. My old Buick hummed along Woodward Avenue, steady and deliberate, just like the thoughts circling in my head. I wasn't going for groceries or prescriptions this time. I was hunting for tools, not the kind that fixed machines, but the kind that exposed liars. The grief-stricken widower Helen thought I was had faded. In his place stood the man I used to be, an engineer with a problem to solve. Tech World Electronics looked small from the outside, but inside it felt like walking into the future. Shelves lined with sleek devices, cameras smaller than my thumb gadgets I could barely have imagined during my years at the plant. A young clerk with thick glasses spotted me and approached. "Looking for something special, sir?" he asked politely, though I could tell he wondered what an old man like me wanted with all this equipment. "Yes," I said. "Something discreet. Home security." His eyes lit up, and he led me to a wall of compact black devices. He pointed to one. "This model records in full HD motion, activated with night vision. Connects to your phone." I picked it up, the weight surprisingly light in my hand. The specifications were clean: 1080p resolution, 12-hour charge, infrared clarity in the dark. Exactly what I needed. Back home, the house was empty. Helen at her supermarket shift. Cleo at whatever overtime story he was peddling that day. I spread the contents of the box across the kitchen table like I used to lay out blueprints. The instructions were straightforward, but I didn't need them. Years of diagnosing engines gave me an instinct for precision. Within an hour, the camera was hidden behind the frame of Helen's wedding photo, angled perfectly to capture both my wallet on the nightstand and the water glass beside it. I tested it twice, adjusting the angle until the image on my phone app showed everything in crisp detail. Then I closed the curtains and watched as the infrared sensors clicked on, painting the room in ghostly clarity. Every movement was caught, every shadow dismissed. I placed $300 in my wallet, enough to tempt, not enough to ruin me. Then I set it in its usual place, next to the glass Martha had insisted I keep by my bed years ago. That night I lay awake longer than usual, the faint hum of the house pressing in. I wasn't nervous. I was focused. For weeks I had felt trapped, doubting myself, questioning my memory. But now for the first time I felt control returning. I had built the trap with my own hands, and soon it would spring. At exactly 7 Surkshur the next morning, I opened my wallet. Empty. The 300 was gone. My hand didn't shake as I reached for my phone. The app displayed a single clip time-stamped at 2:47 a.m. I pressed play, my heart steady but my jaw tight. The truth was about to appear in black and white, and this time there would be no denying it. The screen glowed faintly in the dark of my bedroom as I pressed play. The recording began with silence, just the grainy view of my dresser and nightstand under the infrared glow. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and I wondered if perhaps the camera had failed. Then the door eased open, slow and cautious, the hinges whispering against the frame. A shadow slid inside. My breath caught, though I had expected it. Cleo moved like he'd done this a dozen times before, steps practiced avoiding the creaks he must have memorized. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance around like someone curious or confused. He went straight to the wallet, plucking it up with a thief's precision. He thumbed through the bills, counted quickly, then pocketed the money. His efficiency chilled me. It was too smooth, too deliberate. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was routine. But then what happened next turned my stomach in a way no theft ever could. Cleo picked up my water glass, the one I drank from every morning, and with deliberate malice he spat into it. Not carelessness, not accident. A calculated insult. Proof of his contempt for me, the man who had given him a roof, a seat at my table, the trust of my daughter. I watched the video twice, then a third time, the bile rising higher with each replay. The theft I could have handled. But this was different. This was hatred. I saved the video to both my phone and the cloud, my hands trembling not from fear but from fury. There was no mistaking the face, the movements, the contempt. The evidence was complete. And yet, as I sat there staring at the frozen image of Cleo slipping money into his pocket, I realized I had a choice to make. Confrontation could shatter Helen's world. Silence meant surrender, but there was a third option: patience. Let him think he had me fooled while I prepared the final move. Still, I needed counsel. Jim Patterson, my old friend from the plant, answered on the second ring. "Jim, I caught him," I said flatly. "Video proof. Clear as day." Jim was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "So what now, Lester? You going to the police?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "This will destroy Helen. But letting it go will destroy me. Evidence is evidence," Jim said firmly. "A thief in your home isn't family, no matter what name he wears." After hanging up, I stared out the window, the neighborhood bathed in the pale light of morning. Cleo's truck sat in the driveway like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't the serpent inside my house. My jaw tightened. He thought he was clever. He thought my age was weakness. He didn't know he had just declared war, and I had the proof in my pocket. The decision crystallized in me as clear as the infrared footage. I wouldn't rush. I would let him dig his own grave step by step until the truth buried him completely. The day after I captured the footage, I moved through my routine as if nothing had changed. Helen hummed while making breakfast, sliding eggs onto my plate the way her mother once did, smiling as though the house still held peace. Cleo came downstairs, late, rubbing his eyes and stretching like a man who had worked all night. I watched him pour coffee, the same coffee brewed with the pot of water I now distrusted. My stomach turned knowing what I had seen. He looked at me with that same smug confidence, certain I suspected nothing. It was almost laughable, but I smiled faintly, hiding the storm behind my eyes. "Long shift last night?" I asked casually. "Yeah," he replied, leaning against the counter. "Warehouse work never ends." "Dangerous, isn't it?" I said, feigning concern. "Handling chemicals, moving heavy loads." He nodded quickly, too quickly, as though eager to cement the lie. Helen looked at him with admiration, pride lighting her eyes. My daughter believed she was married to a hard-working provider. What she didn't know was that her gold chain, her bracelet, even the food on the table lately had been paid for with her father's stolen money. I let the conversation die and finished my breakfast in silence, but inside me a different kind of hunger grew. Not for food, for justice. I'd spent decades fixing machines, diagnosing failures, preventing disasters before they spread. Now I was treating Cleo the same way: monitor, collect data, prepare the fix. The video was proof, but I wasn't done. Not yet. That evening after Helen went to bed, I reviewed the footage again on my phone. Every detail burned into my memory. The calm way he approached my nightstand, the practiced fingers pulling out bills, and worst of all, that disgusting act of spitting into my water. It was evidence, yes, but also insult. He wasn't just stealing, he was mocking me. I imagined confronting him right then, shoving the phone in his face, watching his lies crumble. But the image of Helen's face stopped me. She would defend him at first. Love does that, it shields truth with hope. If I accused Cleo too early, she might see me as bitter, paranoid, maybe even senile. No, the timing had to be perfect. When the truth came out, it had to be undeniable, shattering every illusion at once. So I kept silent, even as Cleo strutted through the living room the next day, slipping an arm around Helen's shoulders while flashing his fake provider's smile. I nodded, played the role of tired father, while inside I was sharpening the blade of truth. That night before bed, I wrote a note in my old leather-bound journal. He thinks I am helpless. He thinks age has dulled me. But I am still an engineer. I will solve this problem. Then I closed the book and slid it into my drawer beside the wallet. The trap was set. Evidence secured. All I needed was patience. And patience, unlike money, was something Cleo could never steal from me. Nights passed with the same pattern, each one confirming what I already knew. Cleo waited until the house was silent, then slipped into my room like a shadow. The first time I watched the recording, it felt like a dagger. By the third and fourth, it became something else, a blueprint. He always came between 2 and 3 in the morning. He always moved with that same false confidence. And he always left with my money, stuffing it into his pocket, as though I'd never notice. But this wasn't just theft anymore. It was a system, a routine. And as an engineer, I knew routines could be dismantled once you understood their design. My design would not be shouting in the dark. It would be methodical, precise, unforgettable. During the day, I played my part. I sipped Helen's coffee, nodded at Cleo's stories, even complimented him, when he claimed to work late. Helen beamed with pride, convinced her husband was a man of grit and sacrifice. Each smile she gave him made my chest ache because I knew the truth. He wasn't working overtime. He was working me. I confided again in my old friend Jim one afternoon. We met at the diner we'd gone to for years, the kind of place where the waitress still knew our orders. Over meatloaf and black coffee, I told him everything. The video, the pattern, the insult with the water glass. Jim's hands clenched into fists. "Lester," he said, his voice low but firm, "this isn't just about money. This man disrespects you. He spits on you literally. You can't let this stand." "I won't," I said, quietly sliding the phone across the table so he could see the footage. He watched, his jaw tightening with every second. When it ended, he pushed the phone back to me. "You've got him dead to rights. Now the question is, what do you want, exposure police or something he'll never forget?" I stirred my coffee slowly. "Not the police. Not yet. I want Helen to see the truth herself. She needs to know who she married." Jim nodded. "Then set your stage carefully. Evidence is your weapon, but timing will be the kill shot." On the drive home, I thought about his words. He was right. I had the evidence, but evidence alone doesn't change hearts. It's the moment of truth, the confrontation, that breaks illusions. That was what I needed to create. That night, as I prepared for bed, I placed my wallet deliberately on the nightstand again, the bait ready for another performance. My phone sat charging beside me, the app open, waiting. Sure enough, at 2:19 a.m., the door creaked open and Cleo's silhouette entered. The camera caught it all, his hand reaching his lips, curled in contempt, as he handled my belongings like a thief in a pawn shop. But this time, as I watched silently from behind half-closed eyes, I didn't feel fury. I felt control. He thought he was winning. In truth, he was already trapped, his arrogance tightening around him like a noose. By the time March rolled in, the evidence filled my phone like a case file. Clip after clip, timestamp after timestamp, each one showing Cleo creeping into my room, rifling through my wallet, pocketing my money, and most sickening of all, spitting into my glass. It wasn't random. It wasn't desperation. It was ritual. A routine built on arrogance, and it fueled me more than anger ever could. I began marking the calendar on the kitchen wall, red X's over the nights I caught him. January 15th, February 14th, March 3rd, each date a reminder that I wasn't imagining things. Each X was proof. To Helen, it probably looked like the eccentric habits of an old man. To me, it was a map of betrayal. Every day at breakfast, I played the fool. I let Cleo spin his stories about overtime, chemical hazards, and backbreaking work. Helen lapped it up, eyes shining with pride for her hard-working husband. I nodded along, smiled faintly, even pretended to admire the new shoes he wore, or the watch glinting on his wrist. All of it, I knew, bought with money that had once sat quietly in my wallet. But I never let my mask slip. Patience was my ally, and I wore it well. Inside, though, I was designing something more than silent observation. Evidence was important, but exposure was crucial. I wanted the truth to hit Cleo where he lived in Helen's eyes. She loved him, defended him, believed in him, and that love would be his undoing when she saw the footage herself. That was the real trap I was building, not just catching a thief, but destroying the illusion he had built around my daughter. Late one evening, I reviewed the latest clip while Helen was at her shift. Cleo entered as usual, his movements mechanical, confident. He didn't know his every theft was catalogued, his every sneer captured forever. Watching him move, I realized I didn't feel like prey anymore. I felt like the hunter watching the predator walk blindly into a snare. Still, doubt crept in when I thought of Helen. How would she react? Would she believe her own eyes, or would she accuse me of tampering, of resenting her husband? I couldn't answer those questions yet. But I knew one thing: the day was coming when there would be no place left for Cleo to hide. That night, I set my phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling long after the house fell silent. "Not yet," I whispered into the dark. "But soon." I thought back to Martha, my late wife, and what she would have said. She'd remind me that family means trust, and trust is sacred. Cleo had violated that trust not just with theft, but with contempt. She'd tell me to protect Helen even if it meant breaking her heart. So I hardened my resolve. The first phase, gathering evidence, was complete. The second phase, exposing him, was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't just be about stolen money. It would be about restoring dignity in a house where contempt had taken root. The first real crack came at the dinner table, and it wasn't about money. It was about respect. Helen had made beef stew that night, the kind Martha used to make when the winters pressed hard against our windows. The smell filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, but the air at the table was anything but. Cleo sat across from me, shoveling food with a restlessness that had become second nature. He wasn't eating dinner. He was masking nerves. "Dad, you've been working on something in the garage all afternoon," Helen said lightly, trying to make conversation. "New project," I smiled, tearing a piece of bread. "Just organizing tools. Amazing what you find when you look closely enough." Cleo's fork froze halfway to his mouth. He glanced at me sharply, the way a man looks when he hears the footsteps of the law. He didn't know what I had, but he knew I had something. That alone was enough to rattle him. I leaned back as if in casual thought. "You know, it's fascinating how technology can show you things these days. Home security systems, cameras. You'd be surprised what people can learn when they pay attention." Helen looked puzzled. "Security? Are you worried about break-ins?" "Not break-ins," I replied, my eyes never leaving Cleo. "More like internal security issues." That was when he snapped. He dropped his fork and leaned forward, his voice sharp with irritation. "There you go again with your paranoia, Lester. Maybe if you didn't lose track of where you put things, you wouldn't be blaming other people." The words stung, not because they were true, but because they were his weapon. The thief who had stolen hundreds from me dared to call me senile in my own home. Helen's spoon clattered into her bowl. "Cleo, stop. Dad's just trying to have dinner." But Cleo wasn't done. He pushed back in his chair, chest heaving. "I'm tired of listening to complaints from a cheap old man who counts every penny like it's his last." Silence. It rolled over the table, heavier than any insult I'd ever heard. Helen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My grip tightened on the bread, but my voice stayed calm, steady, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Cheap old man? That's what you think of me?" Cleo's face flushed. He tried to backpedal, muttering, "That's not what I meant." But it was. It was exactly what he meant. And in that moment, I saw clearly what the camera had already shown me. Cleo wasn't just a thief. He was a man who despised me, who spat on me both literally and figuratively, who believed my age made me irrelevant. I pushed back from the table slowly, never raising my voice. "Respect, Cleo. That's the currency a man earns in a home. And tonight you've shown me exactly how bankrupt you are." Helen's eyes darted between us, confusion and fear etched on her face. She didn't know the half of it yet. But soon, very soon, she would. The silence after Cleo's outburst lingered like smoke. Helen's hands fluttered nervously as she tried to salvage dinner-stacking bowls and muttering something about needing peace. But the damage had been done. Words once spoken can't be stuffed back into a man's throat, and Cleo had revealed more of himself than he meant to. I sat quietly watching him. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, but behind the bluster I saw something else: fear. Not the fear of a guilty man being accused, but the fear of someone who knows the walls are closing in. He didn't yet know how much I had, but he sensed it, and that made him dangerous. Helen turned to me, her eyes soft with worry. "Dad, please. Can't we just have one peaceful meal? You've both been so tense lately." I nodded, forcing a faint smile for her sake. "Of course, sweetheart. Sometimes people show their true character when they think nobody's watching, but maybe we'll talk about that another time." Cleo shoved back his chair, muttering something about needing air, and stomped upstairs. Helen sat across from me, searching my face. "What did you mean by that? What's going on between you two?" I studied her for a long moment. She deserved the truth, but not yet. Truth, like a tool, had to be used at the right moment, or it risked breaking everything in your hands. "You'll understand soon enough," I said softly, patting her hand. After she went to bed, I sat in the quiet kitchen, the tick of the clock echoing against the tile. I thought back to Martha's steady voice, the way she always said patience was a man's greatest strength. She was right. Anger was what Cleo wanted. If I exploded, he'd twist it into proof that I was paranoid. But patience would be the rope he used to hang himself. That night, I pulled out the leather journal from my drawer. In it, I began outlining what I called Phase 2. Phase 1 had been evidence, cold, undeniable proof of theft. Phase 2 would be exposure, timing it, so Helen would have no choice but to see with her own eyes the man she had married. I scribbled notes like blueprints, dates marked with red ink, reminders to stay silent until the final piece fell into place. As I wrote, I heard Cleo moving around upstairs, heavy-footed, restless. He slammed a drawer, cursed under his breath, then went quiet. I could picture him pacing, trying to convince himself he still had control. He didn't. Control had already shifted. Before bed, I walked into my room and set my wallet on the nightstand again. Not because I needed more proof, the camera already had weeks of evidence, but because I wanted him to believe the game hadn't changed. Let him think I was still the same old man he could rob at will. I climbed under the covers, eyes closed, listening to the creak of the hallway floorboards hours later. Right on schedule. Predictable, and soon, predictability would be his downfall. The next morning, the house smelled of coffee and toast, but it did little to sweeten the bitterness in the air. Helen moved briskly, determined to patch the cracks from last night's dinner. Cleo sat with his shoulders stiff, scrolling his phone, avoiding my gaze. He wanted the world to believe he was still in control. But I had the recordings, the evidence, the red X's on my calendar, all of it, building a case that was stronger than his bluster. I sipped my coffee slowly, studying him over the rim of the mug. He looked up once, caught my eyes, and quickly looked back down. That twitch told me everything. He knew I was watching. He just didn't know how much I'd already seen. After breakfast, Helen left for her shift at the supermarket. Cleo muttered something about heading to work too, though I knew better than to believe it. His truck rumbled down Maple Street, and the house settled into silence. I pulled out my phone and replayed the footage from the night before. It was all there again, the stealth, the theft, the contempt. The repetition didn't weaken the evidence. It sharpened it like steel being honed. By mid-afternoon, I drove to a little shop on the edge of town, not the electronics store this time, but a place that sold novelty items and practical jokes. A ridiculous setting for what I intended, but perfect nonetheless. Rows of rubber snakes and fake spiders greeted me, but I had one item in mind. I asked the clerk for a shocking wallet, the kind that delivered a safe but unforgettable jolt. She handed it over with a raised eyebrow, and I tested it on my palm. The zap stung just enough to make me smile. Yes, this would do. I bought a stack of prop bills as well, printed so well they could pass in dim light. Together they would become my bait. A trap disguised as carelessness. Cleo had grown bold, certain I was too old to notice. It was time to remind him what it felt like to underestimate me. That evening, we all sat down for dinner again. Helen tried her best to chatter about her day, about co-workers and weekend plans, but the air was heavy. I watched Cleo more than I ate. He picked at his food, his eyes darting now and then toward me, measuring, calculating. Funny thing about technology, I said suddenly, my tone casual as I tore off a piece of bread. It shows you truths people don't expect you to see. Helen frowned, confused. Cleo's fork clinked against his plate. You're obsessed with nonsense, he snapped. Maybe if you stopped imagining problems, this house would be peaceful. I leaned back in my chair, letting his anger flare. Or maybe I said softly, peace ends when respect does. He shoved his chair back, storming upstairs without another word. Helen stared at me, shaken. Dad, what's happening? I looked at her gently. You'll understand soon, sweetheart. Some lessons can't be taught with words. They have to be seen. That night I prepared the trap with the care of a craftsman, setting the final piece into a machine. The shocking wallet sat in my hands, loaded with crisp counterfeit bills that looked and felt real in dim light. I slid them neatly into the slots, arranging them the same way I always kept my real money. From the outside, no one would suspect a thing. But hidden inside was a lesson, 9-volt strong, safe, but unforgettable. I placed the wallet back on my nightstand beside the water glass, as I had so many nights before. The camera behind the photo frame remained fixed, its small red light invisible in the dark. I adjusted the curtains so the room was cloaked just enough for the trap to feel authentic. Then I lay down, staring at the ceiling, every nerve sharpened with anticipation. Hours passed. I listened to the house settle into its nightly rhythm. Helen turning pages of a book in the next room, Cleo's heavy footsteps upstairs, the faint tick of the hallway clock. At 11:45, Helen's light clicked off, plunging her room into silence. By 1:30, the house was so still that even the refrigerator hum felt loud. That was when I heard it, the soft groan of a floorboard in the hallway. My heart pounded, but I forced my breathing to stay slow, steady, the rhythm of sleep. Cleo's silhouette appeared in the doorway, careful and deliberate. He paused, scanning the room, making sure I was still. Then he moved with the same precision I'd watched on my phone so many times before. 3 steps, pause. 2 steps, pause. At my nightstand now. His hand reached down. The wallet disappeared into his palm. I waited. Then it came, the sharp crackle of the zap, followed by a strangled cry. Cleo stumbled backward, clutching his hand, the fake bills scattering across the floor. What the? He gasped, shaking his fingers in pain. The sound was louder than he expected, loud enough to echo down the hallway. I sat up slowly, flicking on the bedside lamp with deliberate calm. Cleo, I said, in a voice that could freeze stone. What are you doing in my room at 2 a.m? He stammered, eyes wide, his hand still trembling. I was just getting a glass of water. I looked down at the bills littering the carpet, then back at him. Strange. My money seems to have followed you. His face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping on shore. He bent down, fumbling to scoop up the bills, but I leaned forward, stopping him with a single word. Don't. For the first time since he moved into my home, I saw it clearly in his eyes, fear. The kind of fear that comes when a man realizes he's been cornered, when the mask he's worn has finally cracked. I held his gaze steady and unflinching. You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought age made me blind. But you were wrong. And tonight, you just proved it yourself. Cleo stood frozen in the yellow glow of the lamp, his chest heaving, fake bills scattered like confetti around his feet. He tried to recover, straightening his shoulders, forcing that practiced arrogance back onto his face. But the tremor in his right hand gave him away. "You're imagining things," he said, finally, voice hoarse. "I just came for water. Those bills are proof," I cut in my voice, calm, almost too calm. "Proof that you've been creeping into my room night after night, stealing from me while I sleep. Proof that every trinket you've given Helen was bought with my money. And proof of your contempt when you spat into my glass." The color drained from his face. "That's insane. You have no—" I picked up my phone from the nightstand and held it where the screen glowed between us. "No evidence. Let's review, shall we?" His eyes widened at the sight of the paused video frame, his own face clear under infrared light leaning over my wallet. He lunged toward me, but I pressed my thumb to the play button. The audio of his footsteps, the clear image of him pocketing the cash, and then his head bending over my water glass. The spit. His spit. Cleo froze mid-step. For the first time, he had nothing to say. His mouth opened, then shut again, no lie able to bridge the gap between what he wanted Helen to believe and what the camera had already shown. From the hallway, Helen's voice cut through the silence. "What's all that noise? Is everything okay?" Her footsteps padded closer, and Cleo's eyes went wild, darting from me to the door. I didn't move, didn't blink. "Yes, Helen," I said evenly, "come in. There's something you need to see." She appeared in the doorway, hair-tousled robe tied loosely around her. Her eyes took in the scene, the fake bills, Cleo pale and trembling, me, holding my phone like a weapon. "What's going on?" I turned the screen toward her and pressed play again. Her gasp filled the room as she watched her husband move across the screen with calculated stealth lift, my wallet take the money. Then the moment that shattered her, the deliberate spit into my glass. She covered her mouth with both hands, eyes brimming with tears. "Cleo, is that really you?" "It's fake," he shouted desperately. "He doctored it, Helen. He's trying to ruin us," but she shook her head. Slowly, tears streaking down her cheeks. "No. That's you. That's our bedroom door. That's the shirt you wore yesterday." Her voice cracked. "How could you?" Cleo's face collapsed into fury, his mask shattered. "You'll regret this, old man," he hissed at me, but the words rang hollow. Helen turned to me, her voice shaking but resolute. "Dad, what do we do now?" I placed the phone gently on the nightstand and looked at her. "Now, sweetheart, you see the truth, and tomorrow we decide how to act on it." Morning came heavy with silence, the kind of silence that clings to the walls after a storm. Helen moved through the house like a ghost, her robe dragging along the hallway, her eyes hollow from a night of betrayal. Cleo stayed shut in the guest room, emerging only once to slam a drawer so hard the whole floor shuddered. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, watching steam rise from the cup, letting him stew in the trap he had walked into. Helen finally sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug she barely sipped. She stared at the wood grain of the table, then at me. "Dad," she whispered. "How long?" "Months," I answered softly. "Since January, maybe longer." Her face crumpled. "All those gifts, the chain, the bracelet." She pressed her fist against her lips, stifling a sob. "They were all bought with your money." I nodded, steady and calm for her sake. "Yes. But worse than that, he despised me. It wasn't just theft, it was contempt. You saw it in that video." She winced as though I'd struck her because she had seen it. Her husband spitting into the water her father drank each morning. That image had pierced deeper than any theft could. She whispered, "I don't know how to look at him now." At that moment, Cleo strutted into the kitchen, his face twisted with forced defiance. "We're not talking about this anymore," he barked. "It's over. That video proves nothing." "Helen, you can't honestly believe your father over me." Helen lifted her head slowly, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strength I hadn't heard since she was a little girl, standing up to bullies in the schoolyard. "I don't believe you anymore, Cleo. I saw it with my own eyes." The words landed like hammer blows. He faltered, then recovered with anger. "He's turning you against me, don't you see? He's always wanted me gone." "No," she said firmly, standing now, tears streaking her face but her spine straight. "You did that yourself?" I watched quietly, letting her voice rise, letting her find her strength. That was the moment the illusion cracked for good, not because I had proof, but because she accepted it. Cleo's eyes darted between us, desperate, calculating. He slammed his fist on the counter, rattling the mugs. "This isn't finished," he spat. "I won't be humiliated in my own house." I set my cup down gently, my voice low but unyielding. "This isn't your house, and humiliation is the price a man pays when truth finally catches him." Helen stared at him, her shoulders trembling. Then she whispered the words that sealed it. "Pack your things." Cleo's mouth fell open, stunned, as if he still believed he could charm his way out. But Helen didn't flinch. Her loyalty had shifted, her eyes were clear now. The thief had been unmasked, and there was no turning back. Cleo laughed when Helen told him to pack his things, but it wasn't the laugh of a man amused. It was sharp, brittle, the sound of someone trying to disguise fear with mockery. "You can't be serious." He sneered, his eyes flicking from her to me. "You're throwing me out because of him, because of an old man's paranoia and a cheap trick video." Helen's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "It wasn't paranoia, Cleo. It was you, every night, every gift, every lie. And I saw it with my own eyes." His face twisted, caught between anger and desperation. "Helen, think about what you're saying. We're married. We've built a life. You can't just, 'Yes, I can.'" She interrupted, her tone hardening like steel. "Because the life we've built is a lie. You didn't provide for us. You stole. You humiliated my father. You disrespected the man who gave us a roof." For a moment the mask slipped, and Cleo's anger spilled out raw. "Maybe if your old man wasn't so smug, I wouldn't have had to do it. He sits there with his money judging me like I'm beneath him. Well, maybe I deserve some of it after the way I've been treated." I leaned forward, my voice low but cutting. "You don't deserve a dime. Respect isn't given, it's earned. And you never earned it." Helen's hands shook as she clutched the back of a chair, but her words came steady. "Cleo, you need to leave before you make this worse." He slammed his hand on the counter, rattling the cups again, his defiance sputtering like an engine running out of fuel. For the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes give way to something else, realization. He was losing. He had underestimated me, underestimated Helen, underestimated the power of truth. "I won't be thrown out like some dog," he snapped, his voice dropping lower, now more dangerous. "You'll regret this, both of you." I stood locking eyes with him. "No, Cleo. The only regret in this house belongs to you. You had a chance to be a man, a husband, a son-in-law. Instead, you chose lies and contempt. And now you're choosing the door." Helen nodded, her tears flowing freely but her expression resolute. "Pack your things," she repeated. For a long moment the room was silent, but for the ticking clock on the wall. Then, with a bitter curse, Cleo shoved his chair back and stormed out, his heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs. Drawers opened and slammed. Suitcases unzipped. The sound of his downfall filled the house, echoing through the very walls he had once thought were his to command. I sat back down at the table, exhaling slowly, the weight of months lifting from my shoulders. Helen leaned against the counter, her face pale but her eyes clear. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know what happens next, but I know this much: he's not the man I thought I married." I reached across the table, taking her trembling hand. "Then you've already taken the first step forward, sweetheart. Sometimes the hardest truth is the one that sets us free." By afternoon, the sound of Cleo's packing became the soundtrack of the house. Cardboard boxes scraped against the floor, dresser drawers banged shut, his voice muttering curses under his breath. From my recliner in the living room, I listened without a word. Justice, I realized, doesn't always come with sirens or gavels. It sometimes comes with the sound of a liar tearing apart his own nest. Helen moved quietly through the house, folding her clothes into neat stacks. Her face blotched from crying, but her movements precise, almost mechanical. Where Cleo's rage was chaotic, hers was measured. She paused now and then, staring at an item, a dish, a photo frame, as though wondering how something once so normal had soured into this. When she carried a suitcase past me, I stood to help, but she shook her head. "No, Dad. You've done enough. This part is mine." Her voice cracked, but her spine stayed straight. I saw Martha in her then, my late wife's quiet strength. Outside, neighbors began to notice. Curtains twitched, blinds shifted, subtle silhouettes watching from their windows. In any other neighborhood, it might have been curiosity, but here it was, Theater Cleo's humiliation playing out for the whole street. He hauled a box to his truck, slammed the tailgate, and caught sight of Mrs. Ramsey from across the street, pretending to water her flowers. His face flushed crimson. "You're all enjoying this, aren't you?" He barked toward no one in particular. Helen froze on the step, suitcase in hand. I put a hand on her shoulder. "Don't answer him. Let the truth speak for itself." Cleo stormed back inside, his voice rising. "This is ridiculous, throwing me out because of a stupid video. People make mistakes." I turned to face him, my voice steady. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or misplacing your keys. Stealing from your family for months, spitting in a man's glass, that's not a mistake, Cleo. That's who you are." He sneered, but there was no fight left behind it. The bravado that had carried him this far was cracking like thin ice. He looked at Helen, perhaps hoping for one last ounce of sympathy. But she only whispered, "Don't look at me like that. I don't know who you are anymore." The words landed harder than anything I could have said. His shoulders sagged as he grabbed the last box and shoved past me toward the door. For a moment, I thought he might lash out, might say something cruel enough to scar forever. Instead, he muttered, "You'll regret this, old man. You'll both regret it." I stepped aside, unflinching. "Drive carefully," I told him evenly. "And take care of yourself. You won't be taking care of my daughter anymore." He glared, but there was no power left in his eyes. Just bitterness, just failure. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The house exhaled in the silence that followed. Helen sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. I sat beside her, not speaking, just placing a steady hand on her back. Sometimes words aren't needed. Sometimes presence is enough. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, but the house felt different. Lighter, quieter, as though a storm had finally passed. I made a single cup of coffee instead of a pot, the kind I used to brew for 3. The clatter of Cleo's heavy boots, the restless pacing, the slammed drawers gone. In its place was silence, the kind I had once dreaded after Martha's passing, but now it felt like relief. Helen emerged from her room, slowly, her eyes swollen from crying, but her posture straighter than it had been in weeks. She sat across from me, cradling her mug. For a long time we didn't speak. We didn't need to. The absence of his presence said enough. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, I owe you an apology." I set my cup down and shook my head. "No, sweetheart. You trusted the man you married. That isn't weakness, it's what good people do. Don't blame yourself for his choices." Tears welled again as she stared into her coffee. I should have questioned where the money came from. I should have seen it. "You saw love," I said gently, "and love can blind us. But now you've seen the truth. And truth, though it hurts, always clears the fog." She nodded, but her shoulders sagged. "I don't know where I'll go. I can't stay here with him gone. It doesn't feel right." I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. "This is your home, Helen. It always has been. You and I will figure it out. You have your job, your own strength. You're not alone." Her lips quivered, and she squeezed my hand, a silent thank you passing between us. By midday, the sound of Cleo's truck pulling away for the last time echoed down Maple Street. Neighbors peeked from behind blinds, their curiosity insatiable. Some probably pitied me. Others likely relished seeing a man get what he deserved. I didn't care. For the first time in months, my house was mine again. That evening, Helen and I sat together in the living room. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. She leaned her head against my shoulder just as she had when she was a little girl, scared of thunderstorms. "Dad," she whispered, "thank you for showing me the truth. I would have lived in a lie forever if you hadn't." I kissed the top of her head, my voice low. Sometimes the hardest thing a father can do is let his child's heart break. But better a broken heart than a life built on betrayal. The clock ticked on the mantel, steady and calm. For the first time since December, I felt like the house was breathing again, no longer suffocated by secrets and contempt. The lesson had been taught, the thief unmasked, the dignity restored. But as I stared into the quiet night, I knew this wasn't the end. Betrayal leaves scars, and healing them takes more than truth. It takes time. And time, I promised myself, was something I would give Helen, no matter what. By the next afternoon, the house echoed with a new rhythm. Helen packing her own things, not in anger this time, but with quiet determination. She folded clothes with care-wrapped dishes and newspaper, each movement deliberate as though she were reclaiming control of her life. Cleo was gone, but his shadow still lingered in the corners, and Helen, strong as she was needed, space to heal. I stood in the doorway as she taped up a box of books. "Dad," she said, without looking up, "I can't stay here right now. Too many memories. I need time to think." Her voice was steady, though I could hear the cracks beneath it. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "This is your home, sweetheart. You'll always have a place here. But if you need to go, I'll support you." She turned, her eyes glistening. "I don't even know where we'll end up. But I know we can't go back to what we were." I nodded, my chest heavy yet strangely light at the same time. "You don't need to know today. Just take the first step, and the rest will follow." Outside, Cleo's absence was obvious. His truck no longer sat in the driveway. The neighbors, who had witnessed enough to fuel their gossip for weeks, pretended not to stare as Helen carried her suitcases to the car. I helped her load them box by box, suitcase by suitcase. Each thud into the trunk felt like a chapter closing. When we were finished, she turned to me and hugged me so tightly, I felt her heartbeat against my chest. I'm sorry, Dad, for not seeing, for not believing. I stroked her hair gently. Don't be sorry. You believed in love. That's never something to regret. She pulled back tears, streaking her cheeks, but her chin lifted high. I'll call you when I get settled. It may take time, but I'll be okay. I smiled, though my throat burned. I know you will. You've got your mother's strength. As she slid into the driver's seat, Cleo came to mind one last time. His bitterness, his threats, his arrogance. He thought I was weak, that age made me blind. But he had learned too late that a man who has lived a lifetime of solving problems doesn't forget how. And more importantly, he had underestimated a father's love, the one force he could never steal or counterfeit. I stood in the driveway waving as Helen's car turned the corner and disappeared down Maple Street. For a moment, the emptiness of the house loomed. But then as I stepped back inside, I felt something I hadn't in months: peace. The money was gone, the marriage shattered, but dignity, mine and Helen's, had been restored. Justice hadn't been about revenge. It had been about truth. And truth, when finally spoken, has a way of setting even the heaviest hearts free. When I look back on those months, I don't remember the missing bills as much as I remember the weight of betrayal. Money, after all, can be earned again, but dignity once stolen cuts deeper. My son-in-law thought he could take both and walk away unscathed. Instead, he exposed himself for what he truly was, a man who mistook kindness for weakness and trust for ignorance. For Helen, the lesson was harder. She had to face the shattering truth that the man she loved was not the man she thought she married. And yet in that breaking came strength. She learned that loyalty doesn't mean blindness, and that sometimes protecting your future means walking away from the past. For me, the lesson was simpler, but no less important. Age does not mean helplessness. I was underestimated, dismissed, treated as if my time had passed. But when you've spent a lifetime solving problems, you don't forget how. Patience, preparation, and proof, those were my tools. And with them, I reclaimed my peace. So I say this to you listening now. Have you ever faced betrayal in your own family? How did you handle it? Did you choose silence, confrontation, or something in between? Share your story in the comments. I want to hear how you found your strength. If this story meant something to you, please like, subscribe, and share it. And remember this: the truth may hurt, but it will always set you free. Thank you for listening.